So I feel like a folk school could teach a lot of things that aren't being taught to our kids, but not as a way of just for an academic purposes, but for preparation for life, preparation for defense, preparation for internet or intellectual self-defense. That's what it'd be. It would be kind of like mental judo, something like that.
Intellectual warfare.
Yeah, there you go, warfare, because there's an attack on your mind. Black minds don't matter right now, not to the national folks.
It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free.
All right, so Ish, here's the thing. I've been thinking about teachers as the thing that we always talk about, not just as public school educators, but as activists or as revolutionaries. All the stuff we talk about over time, teaching is a revolutionary act. Teaching is subversive in some ways, and we're preparing our kids for themselves to be able to practice freedom. Well, here comes that moment, because right now, starting next year, starting in January, there is a litany. I have a very long list of the things that are going to either be passed or try to be passed next year, none of which are good for us. But when it comes to education, the thing that I'm really worried about, number one, is the serious regulation of what we can teach and learn. There's a provision within some of what's coming up that will take away Title I money. First of all, the Title I money, it looks like, will be phased out over a period of years. So it's going to decline every year. Title I will be phased out as part of this new plan. But even before then, you could lose your Title I money if you teach the wrong things. So if you teach CRT, what I'm thinking about when I think about you and the world that you travel in, first of all, what are the organizations that you participate in nationally that you think could be powerful links to each other? Like what are the social studies groups? What are the associations? One comes to mind that isn't social studies, but like Rethinking Schools. But what are the like networks that someone like me could tap into, or tell other people to tap into as a way of collaborating?
That's interesting. You asked that. So when it comes to like more of the established social studies national organizations, they tend to be inhabited by a diverse range of people on the ideological spectrum.
What? We'll say more about that. Definitely say more about that.
So some of the national social studies organizations, like, I guess I could say National Council of Social Studies, they're founded on this kind of like idea of social studies education being that big, huge tent that does involve all of it, right? But then when it becomes to controversy, they step away from it. So like when you talk about them circumstances, it's like, well, a lot of the major organizations that get like a lot of money, those organizations are usually beholden to status quo type orientation, right? And if it gets controversial, but controversial in this way, they'll, tuck their tails and run probably from really even truly addressing that. Of course, it'd be talked about in rooms, but the official position of the organization would undertake some type of crusade against it. Hopefully, the work that has been done since George Floyd, because really that's when this work has really went to the next level and people start talking about DEI and putting funding into it. Hopefully some of the infrastructure and relationships have been built between folks already through networking, right? Where there will be people of conscience be like, that we can't be engaged in this, or this is my plan to go around it, right? I think that will happen. But when it comes to national social studies organizations on a smaller scale, I'm actually even involved in a group called Big City Social Studies that has social studies coordinators and even folks who work in departments of social studies education at universities across the country. And we share resources and we meet once a month on what we call like a PLC and discuss these type of like issues, how these things are being taught, what kind of issues are maybe happening in your locality. And especially as we turn this page and go towards, under a Trump presidency, I think that group and organization will be very helpful in kind of seeing the tea leaves from multiple angles, and even like share ideas with one another about what folks are doing to get around it, behind it, under it, over it. And that's the mentality. You also have, I know, BLM week at schools, which is now like a year long. They call it the Year of Purpose. They do a lot of work around kind of pushing back hard against these types of change. They pushed hard back when the anti-CRT backlash happened. And when we say all these things, we think schools played a role in that, right? By publishing stories, by using the hashtags that they use to describe them stories. So like that type of networking, going to each other's conferences, having those back meeting conversations about what we're doing in education. I mean, that's going to be the conversation that folks are going to have over a beer after a long day at a conference, and I think that stuff will go a long way in the sense of learning how to navigate this new scenery.
So the situation sounds like there's a range from professional associations to like informal networks.
Yep.
What about resources and like printable or physical resources that like for instance, I publish in multiple places, but I want to have one place where I put some resources like, for people to tap into. Is there like a place where if parents or churches or schools or out of school people wanted to pull down social studies curriculum that was organized in some way, that was well, I guess that's the only way I could put it, was organized but easily accessible. A lot of teachers go to Pinterest to get stuff. Is there a Pinterest for Black folks? Is there a Blinterest? Pinterest for Black folks where it's easy, accessible. And if not, can we make one that's easy and accessible, but has the resources? We could pull out lessons, stuff maybe like, this is what your kids should know at first grade. This is what your kids should know at second grade. So that we can offer it to people as a resource. If your schools aren't teaching you, maybe there's a way to do some stuff at home.
Yeah. Zen education has always been, education projects always just a resource with the reading and lessons and plans for like grade levels and everything like that. That's always. And then we can't ignore the tool of AI right now. There's a website called Matches School AI, and it has a text level there where you can get a PDF article that's at like a 12th grade reading level and be like, I want like my fourth grader to understand some of these, and then it will level it down to fourth grade.
What's it called?
Matches Schools AI.
Magic Schools?
Yep.
What? This sounds, let me see.
Yeah, it's
that
next
sounds
level,
different.
Bro.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Magic School AI. What? Yeah. Look at that.
Yeah.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
So we got to be honest. We have the tools now to remix the game a little bit, right? As parents, it's easily accessible. I think it's also contingent upon us to read more, to pay attention more, and not simply to like the corporate media. We have to be very clear, like the type of media that we're consuming, especially as we head into the sensationalist show of a Matt Gaetz as the freaking attorney general and freaking Gabby, you know what I mean? Whatever her name is, I forget her name, Gabbard.
Tulsi or Gabbard.
Tulsi Gabbard, director of, national intelligence. So like for me, like all these type of things is just very interesting what it's going to be like. And it's going to be great TV. It's going to be entertaining. You're going to want to spend hours watching.
I don't think so. I'm going to want hours of like drinking some Bartles and James. I'm going to have some Bartles and James. And let me ask you a very basic question. How do you separate social studies and civics and history? Where do you put things? What buckets do you put things in? Like you talk about Matt Gaetz being put into a role, the attorney general. Which class is that? Like which bucket is that in?
What bucket would that fall into? So one of the great things about social studies and speaking in generality, and when we talk about like history and talk about civics, right? Civics would be more of this process. I mean, they should be talking about this in civics classes right now.
Mm-hmm,
You
mm-hmm.
know what I mean? If you're a teacher, what's your salt? But then it also applies to kind of historic precedent. So, like, has something like this happened before? This is the first thing anything like this has happened before. What are the qualifications that, you know, the people who made the Constitution said folks for these appointed positions need? Is there any requirements? What are those requirements? What leeway does the president have to make these things, right? And that's a discussion that, you know, I would argue you should be having with students from like seventh, eighth, like getting them to watch news or at least be somewhat aware of what's going on in the world is very important. And the way to build that muscle is to engage in those like kind of formal and informal, authentic conversations related to what's happening in the world at a given time. And as you do that through the year, it builds upon it itself, right? Because, like I said, this won't be the only thing that we're going, you know, we'll have to talk about our RFK Jr. being HS Human Health and Human Services, and then why is he important? Who's his father? Oh, how did his father get shot? You know what I mean? Like, and then you get into that happened like a couple months after King, in the same year. So and then his brother got shot. So like that's kind of like building upon someone's schema. So someone could connect, like, and then you're more likely to remember all these things because all these things are connected. And then you're seeing it in real terms in the world right now that we live in.
I mean, everyone you just named, that feels almost like a politics lesson in some ways.
Yeah.
Like, there's another discussion to be had, though, about our kids need to learn. What does this say about merit? We're always told, you know, our kids are getting the message that, you know, you don't measure up because it's about merit. It's not about color and all this type of thing. But then how can you look at a situation where you have some of the least qualified people in the country taking on some of the top roles in the country? That in itself, to me, feels like a lesson plan. I don't know if that's about civics, if that's about social studies, if it's about race, but that conversation has to be had, right? Because our kids are going to get this message that merit is what counts. You should measure up and all that. And there's going to be this lesson that the mainstream is not going to want to teach you is that that's BS, right? If you're looking right now, we have a Fox News host that is going to be placed in the role of, he's going to replace a 4-star Black general, a general that or 4 or 5-star Black general. And they're going to put a council together that's going to get rid of all the generals that they don't like, the ones that they consider to be woke military folks. And they're going to be replaced with weirdos, like average people, having nothing to do with merit. But that feels to me like its own lesson to teach young people in this moment. What do you think about the idea of doing some sort of national? I always like to think big about these things, have like a vision for something, but kind of like Saturday folk schools, right? Basically meant to teach what's not going to be taught in schools and bring us together around the issues that the mainstream doesn't want us to touch, so that we can kind of take over the means of production when it comes to education for our kids. If the district work with the district schools and schools just in general on what they can do, but then also figure out a way to create a cultural movement. I don't know what you would call it. Kind of like, the Chinese and the Koreans have some form of that. I think we could have form of that. You think it would take off? You think people would actually do that? You think we could get people on a Saturday, for instance, to give up some time? Would you? You got all them kids at your house, like, would you give up your Saturdays to either teach or to, to be with your kids, your own kids?
Well, I mean, I kind of already do with my,
So I just got to join yours then.
Well, we have, the monthly Africana Studies Lecture and Workshop series. That's like once a month on a Saturday. It's like 3 hours. There's also many other examples of those type of things popping up in situations that happen when we're talking about Black literary societies, when we're talking about like book clubs, even after George Floyd, or even the formation of organizations that happened afterwards. I just spoke for an organization for their meeting, Coalition for Justice. And this organization in the suburbs of Philadelphia literally formed after George Floyd, as a result of that, and the need for fight for racial justice. But there were people from Ohio, LA, and like all over the place on the call. But that shows you that kind of work that gets done in moments like this, right? And so I think any idea what you're talking about is great, especially if you have the capacity, the energy, the time, and all that to put into making that a reality. And myself, I would co-sign them and consume myself, because these type of things, you're right, like many folks aren't exposed to even ideas. So how can you even have a conversation or form a nuanced opinion if you're not shown the whole picture, or if you're only shown a picture in a way that kind of demonizes and dehumanizes folks from what's the other side, right? And what they stand for. So I think when we're talking about that, any conversation that goes against that type of time, that goes into that type of, toxicity, that goes against it, I'm all about that life. So I think it'd be a good idea.
I think probably a start would be to assemble what people are already doing. Like, so do a scan nationally, because you just mentioned things that people are doing right there. And I think I just need to start collecting a list. And if nothing else, the list becomes the beginning. That becomes the beginning, and start seeing how people can have some central. I've thought about this folk school thing for a while, because I think that there's practical applications that we need to start thinking through. Like, even in my own life, I think about my kids. Prepper. You know what preppers are? You ever watch these shows with preppers?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, see. So preppers are, it's a national, I would call it a movement, but it's people that are preparing for doomsday. So they've already figured out, all the food that they need. They've got like 5 years of shelf food. They've learned how to make water out of air. They've learned how to like take care of their own medical problems,
Take your pee in a jar and turn the pee into water that's drinkable.
Yeah. Well, see, I ain't doing all that. I'll be thirsty. I guess I'll be thirsty if it comes to that. But I mean, there are whole books now on this, how to homestead, the Sharif stuff. You see how Sharif does, like with his, raising chickens and bees and creating his own honey and all that. But I thought, man, that could be like a school, because when you're very urban, there are things like you don't learn, like the King Randall stuff where he's teaching students how to change the oil in their cars, change the brakes on a car. So you're not paying people for everything. That's more of like my grandfather's era of things but he had to learn that because he had to. He had to learn those things for survival, because you can't always be taking your stuff to professionals and paying for it. You become the professional. So I feel like a folk school could teach a lot of things that aren't being taught to our kids, but not as a way of just for an academic purposes, but for preparation for life, preparation for defense, preparation for intellectual self-defense. That's what it'd be. It would be kind of like mental judo, something like that.
Intellectual warfare.
Yeah, there you go. Warfare, because there's an attack on your mind. Black minds don't matter right now, not to the national folks. I worry about one thing very specifically, and it's that it feels to me I'm getting increasingly this more negative assessment of things, that we're in kind of a really tough spot, in that our numbers are going to stay the same. Other people's numbers are going to grow. The affinity people have for our movement and our civil rights and our fight and struggle is becoming less. There's it's almost kind of like we're being relegated to the legacy minority status. Like, you guys used to matter. Or we used to, not even you used to matter. You never mattered, but we used to listen to you because we felt morally we had to. But now we don't feel like that's even a thing anymore. And what do we have to fight back with? I mean, what are our weapons at all? If we thought we're under attack, I don't even know what our weapons are. Shame doesn't work. Shame, blame, none of those things work. Marching doesn't work.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like what Kwame Ture was saying, Stokely Carmichael, where he's like, that's expecting that your enemy has a conscience to begin with. I think that a lot of this, and I've been ruminating on this ever since the election went down. And don't get twisted, I'm not like saying like, oh damn, like Kamala didn't become president. Like, no, I knew that was going to happen. You know what I mean? It's more of like that's more of a reflection of America, and it just comes back to just being honest about what we're dealing with. It isn't something that is nice. This society has historically, when we see those periods, it's usually just like brief moments where those things are achieved. And then we go back into that valley of kind of the maintenance of that status quo. And, not to make it seem dire, but to make it seem like, okay, so like what we're going to do about this reality, like you just asked, right? So, like, I think about the role the continent of Africa will be playing in the next 50 years. You're talking about almost 40 to 50% of the world's population on that continent. And so, what role will Pan Africanism play in that journey? Will there be attempts to redefine, especially in certain places like in Nigeria, in Africa right now? You have a situation where you have a highly educated population with high unemployment and lack of opportunity. So will there be like movements that will lead to reimagining or testing out different things over in basically where the largest population of the world will be at? And I think Black America could definitely play a role in that. Also, just when we're talking about the cultural contributions of Black people, that's not going to disappear. You're not going to turn around, even though they try to do it to rock and roll, they're trying to do it to jazz a little bit too. But you're not going to turn around one day and say that ain't Black music. Well, what's Black music? What's so special about that? And those type of conversations. So, and ultimately, and this is my last point with this, goes back to the fact that we won't be able to talk about how freedom or a semblance of freedom is thought of to us within this society without talking about Black people. We won't be able to talk about the 14th Amendment and the tax on so-called anchor babies, you know what I mean? Without talking about enslavement in this country, right? A racially based system. So when we have all that in together, you won't be able to take Black people out the equation. It doesn't mean they're going to make you equal, though, and they're going to make you part of the thing. Maybe it becomes a poster on the wall. And then it's up to people like us to make sure that infrastructure is built, that the legacy, the intellectual tradition carries on, and people are aware of all these intellectual genealogies that overlap and deviate from one another, that inform what we call the Black radical tradition, Black radical thought. That
BRT,
a lot of our ancestors.
Black radical tradition. There you go, BRT. You know what? The point that you're making right now that's resonating is sitting in my head right now is that we have not made the connection for our young people to global Blackness, to Africa, and it almost feels like we did that American thing where we ourselves didn't value that and see that as a realistic connection to anything. Like people could wear the medallions, but in reality, they're not wearing the medallion on the inside. They're wearing it on the outside, right? And I think it's going to get to a point now. What you're saying is that that's not going to be an option, right? Like being myopic about how big we think the world is for us is actually hurting us and cutting us off for things. I think we know so little about Africa, contemporary Africa, and part of it, I believe, there's a lot of shame for young people not seeing it as valuable, not anything that's realistic to today's life. But what you just said is true. I mean, I think Russia and China and the United States and others, everybody, Africa is the battery of the world. It's the thing that supercharges. It's the thing you can't exist without. All of the minerals and resources and petroleum and rubber and gold and all that stuff. It's the one place where everybody is still pillaging and still basically enslaving a continent full of people with bad arrangements, bad laws, exploitative relationships, and very few regulations and rules that make everybody play the right way. I mean, we have so many examples of that. The cobalt example is probably one where we should be teaching our kids about that. Know where things come from and know whether the things are empowering you or not. So I think that's definitely a section of whatever folk school would be is Pan-Africanism and reconnection of us to that. I have another one another thing to throw at you quickly, and I know we're going to wrap soon, but so in the last few months, there has been like we like to say black and brown. I'm to the point now where Dr. Charles Cole, who says there is no black and brown, and he's not POC. We're not POC. We're not BIPOC. We're none of those things. I never was with him on that really because I feel like it takes a multiracial coalition and movement to make things happen, right? That's where there's a lot of power, solidarity, organizing, all that stuff. But in this last kind of run up, the last 6 months or so, there was a lot of anti-Blackness that I discovered I didn't know exist in especially in Arab populations, and maybe I just didn't know enough. But when there was I don't know if you caught any of it, there was a literal online fight amongst the groups that were organizing for Palestine versus the groups that were, standard Black Americans who were going to vote for Kamala Harris. And the level of vitriol and anti-Blackness that came out of the Arab population for standard Americans, foundational Black Americans, I hadn't seen that before. And it made me rethink a lot of things because here we are, we're in everybody's coalition, but they're not all in ours. Right. We're in everybody's coalition. We're fighting for everybody's rights. Yeah, come on and join. Come on and let us get out front for you. I think you're a good person to ask this question too, because you are all about that global solidarity stuff. We're all together in this, but I was with you before. What I just saw recently in the last 6 months has been ugly. And I didn't even know it existed. I mean, what would you say to me about that?
Well, I would say that that's part of the course, man, especially in this society and also globally, right? Anti-Blackness is part of the very fabric of of the myth making that goes into a lot of what this society was founded upon. So it's reinforced within this society. We can look at the doll test of anti-Blackness for little children before they're even able to write their names. And it's not like their parents sat them on their lap and taught them that. They learned that from the society. They're indoctrinated in it by the society that they live in. So when we're even talking about kind of like, I wouldn't necessarily say self-hate, but the internalization of someone else's definition of you. And I agree with you 100%. This idea of cross-racial solidarity has made, I would argue, an ugly turn into Black people being willing to relinquish any type of demand that has been existent for a long time to kind of center other people's struggles, right? I believe that happens way too often. That anti-Blackness is still like sprinkled within these things, even though Black people are like at the forefront saying we need to stand up and fight back. And that's a testament, again, to what I was previously saying about the central role that Black folks have played into even constructing an idea of what freedom could be or should be, or that we need to fight for it within our society and context. When I see even the election results, and I see like 43% of Latinos voted for Trump. And I was saying this to my wife the other night. I was like, see, I was telling you some of them folks was problematic because there is kind of a benefit. Maybe it's psychological. Maybe we're talking about the modern psychological wages of whiteness, right? That Du Bois was talking about back in the day, that they feel like they'll benefit from the situation, and that a lot of the issues and problems are associated with metaphorical Blackness or, literal Blackness. And that is reinforced because even if they weren't born within this society, they come from societies that look at getting lighter as getting better. getting darker as being negative, right? And you tie that all together with this kind of economic focus, individualistic, F you pay me mentality. And you turn around, these people ain't on Black people's side. And, we come from a tradition where people like died with only owning the clothes on their back, even though they were everywhere trying to make things happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like we come from like that legacy.
There's so much there. I think my big point about this is how much I had to learn that I didn't know already. Right. The extent to which anti-Blackness is in Arab world is the same. That is the same extent to which you just said about the Latino population in the United States. And when we talk about Latino, for instance, this is a good thing. We should have a lesson on that. People should tell us what that means. And our kids should know what that means, because it's not one thing. The word Latino, just like Asian, it encompasses a lot of people.
A whole lot.
The word Asian includes people that are white adjacent, white passing, all the way to very dark people, right? So when you say Asian, you got to be a little more specific with me about which groups are in that. Same thing with Latino. There are Latinos that for 100% cannot pass as white, and then there's Latinos that are basically white passing and they're white adjacent. So we call it one thing, and really it's actually a variety of things. And it would help us to learn about that, because we would know not to generalize people too broadly, because they're not all the same people. Right? There's a difference between the Mexicans and the Cubans, for instance, in the United States.
Yeah.
The Cubans, I think they would just straight up tell you they're white, or check the white box. So. I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
No. Folks who are from Northern Africa and Arab check off the white box now. Can check off the racially white box on the census. And then when we're even talking about this, and you brought it up brilliantly, but there's actually a book talking about research about what you're talking about. It's called Whitewashing Race. And in it, it's like, well, America is no longer a white and Black dichotomous type of society. But they're like, no, but still Black and white exist at the extremes of the end of a spectrum of different groups. And those different groups, as they come in, how they come in, and also their ability and their proximity with whiteness, really cosigns the idea that they'll be more conservative, they'll have higher incomes, more opportunities, right? And then the folks who associate themselves more proximity to Blackness tend to do worse off economically, tend to get caught up within this society more. So what you just brought up, I've read a book about that. Literally, it's research to show that. But then it also speaks to how Blackness and anti-Blackness plays such a central role still in how folks define themselves, even if they're not defining themselves as white. A lot of folks coming to genres definitely go out their way and be like, we ain't Black though. It's kind of like the Irish and the Italians. You know what I mean? Like that solidarity stops at a certain point. You're like, and nobody's honest about that.
This is for me becoming the point of learning I need to do. This is becoming a topic of learning for me that I need to expand my horizon on, because there's a missing piece here globally in our gospel. Our gospel has a hole in it. We are missing what used to be there. I mean, that's the Frantz Fanon stuff, I think, in a lot of ways, right? And there's no equivalent to a Frantz Fanon today. And even as I say that, people who are watching this, many of them haven't read a single word of Frantz Fanon. And there's almost this sense that that's old and that's like gone. Like somehow that corrected itself. The stuff he talks about is old and gone. And in some ways, it's not. Some ways you could go right back and pick up some Frantz Fanon today and replace everything else you're reading with it, and it could be relevant today, right? Yep. I think like whatever we think about, when we think about a folk school, there needs to be a lesson plan on that. There needs to be a unit on that, because we are learning right now our power isn't aligned. Our power isn't as pronounced as it needs to be for us to survive. Politically. So we only have a couple of choices. Number one, fully integrate and lose all of our power and give up on the idea of a Black people and just a people within another people's life or scheme.
That overwhelmingly and disproportionately will still be getting the shorter end of the stick throughout that whole process. But go ahead.
Absolutely. Right. Like we could succumb to it. We could just say, okay, well, listen, there's no,
we're all Americans now.
We're all Americans, and even worse, we could just see ourselves as consumerists, right? And that could become our new slavery. That could become the new slavery. Unconscious, unstudied, consumerist behavior could be our thing. That could become our new religion. And that could be like the fentanyl of intellectualism, right? Just because it has drug properties. It could be alluring. I mean, we got stuff-ish. We got a lot of stuff, right? But that stuff will kill you at some point. Well, listen, I appreciate this conversation. I want us to keep having a conversation between us and nationally and whatever our networks are going to look like. Next week, we're going to be, for people that are watching this is what's happening now. If you're watching this at a later date, this is not happening now. But next week, we're going to be in Philadelphia with probably 1,000 Black male educators. We're going to have an opportunity to be talking about like what our best next step could be in general. And we have networks. We're not without resources and people. That's the one joy of my life. The beauty of my life is when I think about these things, I'm not nihilistic in the thinking that I'm alone. I have people like you I could tap into and just ask you. See, like today was really more about me being curious. You just solved some of my problems for me. And I think I just need to keep doing that with everybody that I feel like is a walking library of resources and lessons and even like critical understanding. So appreciate you, brother. Any final words about this, like our new movement forward?
Yeah, I just want to say, and emphasize the fact that Black folks won't be able to do it by themselves. Solidarity will be needed. But it's very important for folks to be very clear about not sacrificing your, I don't want to say dignity, that's the wrong word, but our collective meaning and significance in this creation of, I don't want to say of this civilization, of this, but like that grandiose, I mean, that major. So like put respect on our name and folks would, go all out. But see, that's the issue, especially within American society. People benefit from the racial bribe. And, the more folks they allow to receive that bribe, the less Black people will be able to benefit or be able to be in solidarity with folks like that. So
that's so deep, man. That's so deep. I know it's at the end of the show, but folks, look this one up because Michelle Alexander in her book talks about the racial bribe, the racial bargain. And the quick story about that is whenever white supremacy starts running out of people, it figures out a way to recruit new people into the cause. And one of the things they do is they make a bribe. You will be better off if you join us in anti-Blackness. You will get some form of material benefit from joining us. And, it happened with the Irish, then it happened with the Italians. It happened with all kinds of new groups. Now it's happening with Latinos, and eventually it's going to definitely be an Asian thing. And the one thing that holds all of them together is that they are anti-Black. Anti-Blackness, just like Africa fuels the world and is the battery for the world, anti-Blackness is the accelerant. It's the fuel of global geopolitics. And we don't have not everybody's our friend. Dr. Charles Cole says this all the time. We're on our own. But I knew when I brought this to you, you were going to do the thing where you're going to say, yeah, but we need each other and blah, 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 whatever. So I feel like we have to have multiple ways of looking at the same thing.
By any means necessary.
This is true. By any means necessary. And, that's another show. Malcolm definitely had direct relations with Arabs, did the pilgrimage and came to some broader ideas about the humanity, the unity of man or something like that. And I wonder what he would say today, though.
Well, he spent most of his time in African countries. The movie makes it look like he's had that turnover in Mecca. He was already going.
He didn't?
No. He was in Africa most of that time. Like he only went to Mecca for the pilgrimage.
Okay.
The rest of the year, he was literally visiting different leaders in countries in Africa.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
the
look at
movie does do some bad things then.
Oh yeah, and romanticizes like this shift and this awakening. It's like, no, Malcolm didn't deviate too much. He just started to recognize some of the contradictions in which he accepted at first and unraveling them. But I necessarily don't think that Malcolm just went to Mecca, looked at white Muslims next to him, and was like, white people ain't bad no more. It's a little bit. He grew up with white people.
Well, he grew up in Michigan.
He was in Michigan. Silly.
Matter of fact, he was in a white school and white classrooms and stuff. So yeah, I think that's another crazy. Another part of history that we have to teach, though, because at that time there was a lot of movement around African nations becoming independent and free. Yeah. And they were struggling for their independence. They got it. And then the whole world conspired to make them not benefit from it. Right. They conspired to make it corrupt, for instance. All right. Well, listen, this has been another Freedom Friday, and you're still not free, but hopefully you're freer after this hour with Ish and me. We're going to keep doing this, folks. Next year, we have a challenge on our hands. And the only way to get out of it that I know of, number one, is plan, organize, and act. Those are all the things I can think of right now. And part of planning is educating. Educate yourself, get yourself mentally prepared and engaged. We are going to be working on some resources, some place to put resources so that it becomes more clear of what the network looks like nationally. No one's alone. No one's alone. There are people that are organizing things that we've interacted with, like Black Studies. There's a professor at Harvard that is working on this stuff. Travis Bristol's working on some of the teacher stuff. Sharif El-Mekki is working on the Black male teacher pipeline. These things can all be brought together. And, Ish, the one of the things I wanted to ask you about today was the social studies network. Like, how do we find that network and extract from it things that the average man could use, the average family, the average Sunday school teacher, the average, church pastor or whatever, could grab something offline that becomes our version of what teachers use for like Pinterest or whatever. I don't know enough about it to be dangerous what teachers use. But anyways, thank you all for listening and watching, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Freedom Friday.